Hi, this is Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com. Hope you enjoyed this critical thought, a detailed discussion on game design, and be sure to subscribe and you can pitch future critical thought topics. Alright, we got a quick critical thought for you today. We're going to return to the topic of UI design and kind of a more tips for UI design redux, because there is an earlier critical thought where I talked about several big tips and things you can do to improve your UI, making it more accessible and generally easier to play. Now, when we last talked about UI design, I talked about how it really is an art to design an effective and accessible UI for your game. Now, it's important to mention that a good UI will never save a horrible game. With a car analogy, it doesn't matter how great my leather interior or my air conditioner is if I don't have an engine for my car. But good UI can effectively improve a title, and more importantly, it can keep someone playing. One of the first things that will usually drive me away from a video game is if the UI bugs me. And I'm talking within the first 5 to 10 minutes in. If I'm fumbling through your UI or getting annoyed by it, I know that is going to keep going for the next hour, 3 hours, 5, 10, 20 hours, you name it. It's going to annoy me and it's just going to bring the experience down. And going back to the car analogy, this is kind of like on the opposite end. You have a car that has an amazing engine, great suspension, for you car guys out there, you can insert your parts here. But let's say the steering wheel is loose and the brakes don't go down all the way, and maybe the air conditioner is broken. So while the car is technically operable and great, it's just not great to drive. And again, this is stuff that can just add up over the minutes or hours that your game is going for. Now, when I spoke with the developers of Bit Shifters a few months ago, we talked about how game design is an intersection between entertainment and products. And the UI is a major part of the entertainment side. When I was working at Comcast back about, at this point it must be about 7 years, I had to use a horrible UI system for managing accounts and trying to troubleshoot issues. But again, no one's thinking about an accessible UI when you're doing customer support, or for people who work at fast food restaurants, or even if you're working at a toll booth or anything like that. But when it comes to video games and the fact that this is about providing entertainment, you have to put the extra effort into your UI. Now, for today's critical thought, I actually want to talk about some recent examples and some of the do's and do nots that I saw with them. And the first one is everybody's favorite compound word, hotkeys. A hotkey is basically a button or keyboard command that is a substitute for a visual or on-screen command on screen. And anyone who has played a strategy game or any kind of management kind of title for the PC knows about how useful hotkeys are. They allow for a quick button press to perform a command that would take a few seconds to move the mouse over, and it allows you to do more in a quicker span of time. And when it comes to strategy games, this is the stepping stone from casual to core to competitive, as anyone who has played StarCraft or any strategy game competitively can attest to. Now, with that said, though, you can still have hotkeys and shortcuts even with a gamepad like we have over here. If, for instance, if I can get this held up correctly, if the A button is kind of my yes command or my confirmation, you can have shortcuts for the other buttons. The example that I want to talk about is what I've been playing with Drifting Lands, which is the shmup meets ARPG. And what they do is there's the quick sell command. Basically, anything that involves moving a item either into my inventory, out of my inventory, or onto my ship is all tied to X. And this is a way of, instead of having to press a button and click sell, I can just put my cursor over an item, hit X, the command gets done, and it's quicker. Now, the important thing about hotkeys is that you still need the visual indicator on screen. Because there are many times, especially for high pressure games, where during the heat of the moment we're going to forget those hotkeys. Especially when you have a game that has 10, 20 plus different hotkeys. So it's important to have those visual commands on the screen somewhere so that if I'm, completely frazzled, I can still press the button and get what I want done. Another major point is that if you're going to have hotkeys in your game, be it on a keyboard, on the gamepad over here, or anything like that, it's still very useful to reference those hotkeys. The quick solution would be with having a command list or a button configuration on the options. The more elegant solution would be to actually have the hotkey pop up via tooltip when you put your cursor or mouse pointer or whatever over that command. That one is very effective, especially when it comes to learning hotkeys, because it allows you to immediately associate the action to the indicator and then to the button press itself. A few months ago, I talked about Rise of Nations, and not only why it was one of my favorite real-time strategy games, but the extensive amount of hotkeys that was featured in that game. And quite honestly, there were more hotkeys than I think were actually needed. There were just so many. But typically when it comes to hotkeys for your video game, the more is always better. Granted, you're rarely going to find someone who's going to make use of every hotkey in your game. But we all have our favorites. Strategy fans watching this will probably know about, of course, the attack move command, or hold ground, patrol, stuff like that. And again, you can have hotkeys as, deep as the rabbit hole goes. For instance, in Rise of Nations, there's a hotkey to select every specific unit producing building and then create a unit there. There's hotkeys for quickly selecting the library, quickly selecting scoring, quickly setting up patrols and using special commands and anything like that. And again, it's really it's as big. Wow, my mouth just completely died on me there. It's as big as you want to make it. And you can also go further in terms of hotkey commands by having a secondary association. And what we mean is having a second way for the player to remember this hotkey. For instance, if I want to heal, you could set H as healing, H for heal, or P for potion, M for mana, stuff like that. And another example would be having them based on position. For instance, we talked about with StarCraft, and with StarCraft 2, Blizzard adopted a universal hotkey for every unit based on the position in the little UI pane right here, if you can imagine my hands making a square. So like QWER would be the top row, ASDF would be the middle row, ZXCV would be the bottom row, stuff along those lines. This meant that I could immediately associate by saying, okay, this command's in the upper left, it's gotta be Q. This one's in the bottom left, it's gotta be Z. And of course, when it comes to hotkeys, one other big point, if you're going to go the extra step and have them in your game, also allow players to reassign those commands to different buttons or different keys on the keyboard. This will just ultimately make your game even more accessible. Like I said a few minutes ago, there are hotkeys that only a few people will ever use. Some may be more popular that everyone will use, and allowing them to basically set it up wherever they want it is ultimately going to make it better. For instance, it's not easy for me to lift my keyboard up, but what I did when I was playing a game like Grim Dawn was because my hand was naturally gravitating towards the QWER 1, 2, 3, 4 keys for basically, again, for using skills and potions, I set up important hotkeys closer to those keys because I knew my hands were always going to be there. I didn't want hotkeys on like JKL because how am I going to reach those in the heat of the moment, especially when one hand's on the mouse and one hand's on the left side of the keyboard. Now, the other part of this I want to talk about, and one of the big no-nos when it comes to UI design, is what I like to call excessive switching, or we could say excessive flipping. This is when, in order to perform simple commands, the player has to quickly go between multiple UI elements. Could be different UI window panes, could be different screens. Essentially, what this means is I have to rely on quickly going from 2 to 3 different elements to make simple choices. And this is one of those things that, quite frankly, it drives me crazy when I see this in video games. And the two examples I want to talk about, the first one being Mid-Boss, which we did a spotlight and a few plays of here and over on Twitch. In the game, you have different potions and spell books and stuff like that you can use at any time. But you can only make use of those from the inventory screen. So in order to basically use this command, I have to stop the game, go to the inventory, select the item, and use it from there. Go back to the main screen, and then repeat this every time. Now, what I just said, for those of you watching this, it doesn't sound that big of a deal, and this is why many designers fall into this trap. It seems just like a few extra seconds out of the player's time. But you have to remember, this is a few seconds out of the player's time happening repeatedly. So 3 seconds off now times that by several hundred times during a single playthrough, and it adds up to a lot of unnecessary dead time in your game. And the other example would be from the game Bounty Train, which we did a stream of a few days if you're watching this the day of posting. And what they did was, you have to basically buy and sell goods. It's a game that's built on trading goods from city to city. So what they have is, in the middle of the screen, you have all the resources that are available for purchase. And then over here, you have this little pane that shows the price comparisons from city to city. The problem is that the little pane over here is not either a smart or adaptable UI. So what happens is I have to look at the items over here. Now I have to come back over here, find it on the little screen, click it. Then I have to look at the UI to make sure I figure out, okay, this is worth this much over here, but how much is going to be to sell it over here? And I have to repeat this for every item that's being sold. And as the game goes on, you get more cities. The amount of time spent flipping between these two different parts, even though it's on the same screen, grows and grows. And for those of you who watch that, you can tell that I was starting to get a little bit tired of doing that. And again, that was happening in the span of 40 minutes. Imagine having those frustrating elements and you're playing a 10 to 20 hour long RPG, or even more than that. And that's why bad UI elements can really drag a game down. Here's a little simple analogy. Let's say this line represents the point in which I will either keep playing a video game, or I'm going to put it in my backlog or may never come back to it. If your game is right here, and then UI elements start to annoy me, it starts to pull this game down. So even if you have a good game or a competently made game, if I'm being frustrated 2-3 minutes in, I'm not going to want to sit around and play that game. This is why, and I'm actually going to have to do another critical thought on this soon, why the first 15 minutes or the first impression of your video game is so vital towards keeping people interested and invested in playing your game. And a major part of those first 15 minutes is the UI. If someone brand new buys your game, loads it up, and sees this horrible UI with elements all over the place, chances are they're going to close that game and go, nope, and either refund it or just put it on the back burner and may never get back to it. And you never want that to happen to a game, especially if your game design is good. Like I said, good UI is not going to save a bad game, but a bad UI can sink a good one. And again, this is not a topic that is discussed all that often, simply because it's usually not at the priority for a lot of game designers. You're busy building the levels, designing the systems, and coming up with things on that front. It's kind of hard for you to figure out if your UI is going to be accessible or not. And this is where the importance of getting outside eyes on your game comes in. Also, why Early Access is such a useful feature for game developers, especially if you're building complicated games. Titles like Subnautica, Stonehearth, Duskers, and so on all have benefited from getting those extra eyes on their game to see where players are either getting hung up or getting frustrated or want more usability. In a perfect world, you can, add everything that you want: hotkeys, a dynamic UI, completely redesign your UI on a day-to-day basis. But as we all know, we don't live in a perfect world. And getting those extra opinions on your game can really help, especially if you're still in the beta phase of your game and you still have the maneuverability, or your game is agile enough at this point that you can make these changes and not to completely gut things. You don't want to have to redesign your UI 1 week after launch. But with that said, we're going to wrap things up. And again, I say this was going to be a quick critical thought, and we're almost already at 16 minutes in. But UI design, again, is a multifaceted topic, and it's one that we've talked about before, we're talking about now, and we'll probably talk about again at some point in the future. If you have any specific questions or topics you'd like me to cover relating to UI design or anything like that, please let me know in the comments below. But again, to summarize today's critical thought, a good UI is always going to make your game better. And there's just so many little tricks and tweaks that you can make that can improve your UI. Be it having the option to auto-sort inventory, favorite gear, having like a little item toolbar that players can set shortcuts for using items. And again, these are elements that, depending upon your own knowledge base or how, versed you are in UI design, you may or may not be able to figure these out on your own. And this is why you really do need to have people play test your game. Without those extra eyes, again, it's very easy, especially when you're writing or designing something on your own, to enter, blinders mode. The world outside doesn't exist. And as we've talked about before, developing a game on your own with no outside interaction is one of the surest ways to doom that game. And maybe we should have an industry insight on that at some point in the future. But with that said, thank you so much for watching. If you're new and you enjoyed this, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Check back for daily discussions on game design here and on GameWisdom.com, where we examine the art and science of games. Until next time, have a great night. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and of course share with your friends. It always helps out. For daily posts on all manner of game design and industry topics, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the site and everything that I do, be sure to check out the Patreon campaign. If we can hit goals, it will mean more content for everyone to enjoy, and I'll be able to support myself and my household. If you want to follow me, you can find me on Twitter at GWBycer for updates throughout the day and random thoughts from me. And lastly, you can find me on Twitch right over there at GWBycer for daily streams most nights around 10 Eastern. Thanks again for watching the video, and be sure to check out more great content coming to the Game Wisdom channel real soon.